Thank you, Joyce.
I just went looking in the cabinets for salt and pepper too.
That was a nice present.
Okay, so we're taking a little more time to get ready today because it's the
That's
breakfast.
fine with me. That's fine with me. You
But
can
we're
have
happy to have
breakfast.
Bob join us and
Well, you know, I'm a little torn. I mean, I have a little bit of a presentation here with spirituality and what spirituality to you and the path to spirituality. What is this woman thinking and things like that. But you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to talk a little bit more about my own personal story. I think that might be and my own spiritual journey, you know, as someone who's had a mental illness, you know, a pretty serious mental illness. The one I have is called schizoaffective disorder, which is a type of schizophrenia. Schizophrenia is very disabling, you know, and I'm remarkably lucky that I'm able to function pretty well, you know, and that medications had a big positive effect on me. But you know, it hasn't been perfect. I mean, I've had other psychosis. But anyways, I started. Um, I started in upstate New York. My father taught at Hamilton College, which is in Clinton, New York, and it was perfectly. I mean, I had a normal upbringing. You know, my father moved the family down to University of the South in Sewanee, Tennessee, when I was 8, and so I lived in Sewanee. Some people here might have heard of Sewanee. It's got it's got a seminary there, Episcopal Seminary, St. Luke's. And also they have the EFM, you know, the Education for Ministry. That comes out of Sewanee. And so I think some people here are engaged with that. So anyway, yeah, I mean, it was great, being raised on a college campus. What could be better? You know, there's fun, there's culture, there's students were fun. My father, you know, he had a course where he taught courses, and he also studied with B.F. Skinner. Some of you might have heard of B.F. Skinner. He's a famous psychologist, the Skinner box, you know. My father studied with Skinner when he was at Indiana University. So that really put something into a little bit of a bug into my father, and my father started writing books after that. So my father's authored probably 7 or 8 books and a number of revisions, etc. I don't have that ability to write a book, but I do have written plays. But anyway, so growing up was normal. Went to a high school called St. Andrews, which was when I went there, it was run by the Order of the Holy Cross, an Episcopal order. Then later it became you know, St. Andrews, owned by a board of directors, and then so that was normal. Then except this is when it all began. And this was my senior year in high school. Now, my junior year, I kind of got into the druggies, smoking a lot of marijuana. And then I said, you know, the school is really strict about this. I'm going to wash my hands of it. I'm not going to get involved with the drug culture at St. Andrews. So I straightened out and got into the yearbook and got into a choir that we had called Rejoice. But then when I graduated from St. Andrews, it was a part boarding school, part day school. I was a day student. I went with a friend of mine down to Atlanta. His name was Walter Burson. Went down with him, and we were going to party, you know, with and I had given up pot completely, but I said, I'll start it again. What, you know, I don't have the school looking over my shoulder and threatening to expel me if I got involved with it anyway. So I said, I'll do it again. And so I got really, so Walter introduced me to one of his new suppliers, and we sat in the living room, smoked a joint, and I got very, very high. It was very, very potent. I don't wonder what's going on here. All of a sudden, I went from being high into what's called a psychosis. And a psychosis is best described as a number of delusions. Delusions are things that you think are absolutely reality. You think like you think you're a famous person, or you think that that the mafia is after you, or something like that. You have these delusions of grandeur, delusions of mission, paranoid delusions. Well, anyways, I smoked this pot, and I got into just a terrible paranoid delusion. And I was walking up and down, pacing up and down the kitchen of their house, one end to the other end, back again. And I was thinking, my mind was skipping and I was getting expanded. And I started to think that, oh my gosh, I'm getting older. I'm getting older and I don't want to get older. Time moves faster as you get older. I'm getting older, and so this was really alarming. And so I said to myself, well, how can I stop time from passing along? How can I stop time? And then it came to the conclusion that I could stop time by killing myself. That's how I do it, by taking my own life. That's how I could stop time. Well, Walter and his friend could see that something was wrong, so they said, well, come on, Robert, we'll go to a couple bars and you'll settle down. So we go to a couple bars. I'm sitting in the back seat of his car, and I'm having this delusion, this powerful delusion, that I have to stop time by taking my own life, pulled out a penknife, and I cut myself. I cut myself pretty severely. They rushed me to the hospital, to the emergency room. They stitched me up and put me into the psychiatric unit for a couple of days. And then the psychiatrist said, well, it was entirely the result of the drug. The drug, and I was to find out later, years later, I was to find out that the drug had been laced with another drug called PCP. The street name is angel dust, which is a very, very potent drug, and it can cause great psychosis and great psychiatric problems and all that. So this was my first episode of serious mental illness, the first time I'd been hospitalized, but it was due to the drug. And so my parents came down to Atlanta to try to take care of me, to find out, to take me out of the hospital. And the psychiatrist said to them, don't worry, it's the medication. It's the drug. It was the drug that caused it. He hasn't got any underlying psychiatric difficulty. So I went home, didn't miss a beat. Went to college the following fall and so forth. But over the summer, I noticed that some of my friends were a little bit not there anymore. And there was a little bit of stigma that was involved with having actually done this to myself. And I had a huge amount of what they call self-stigma. I have a huge amount of problems understanding, why had I done this? My life had been fine. I'd done great in high school. I was going to the college of my choice and everything was working out. Why would I possibly try to take my own life? And that question bugged me again and again and again for many years, until, like I said, I found out many years later that the drug was laced with PCP. Well, I got to college and college was fine. Went to Kenyon College in Ohio, Gambier, Ohio. Had a junior year abroad, which was wonderful, and came back. But during my senior year at Kenyon, I started to have what are called intrusive thoughts. And I started to have thoughts of negative, intrusive things that would come into my head, problems that would come into my head, or I thought that maybe I was gay or something like that, which I guess gay isn't a bad thing, but to me that was a bad thing. I didn't want to be homosexual. And I had these thoughts that started to creep into my head. So this was the beginning of the real psychiatric difficulties that I had. And then one thing that happened to me, which happened to me again and again for years, I could not decide what I wanted to do. I could not decide a job to go into, could not decide a career to go into, could not decide anything reasonable to go into. I had these expansive thoughts that I wanted to be a diplomat, I wanted to be a famous person, I wanted to be an actor or what. I would have these really expansive thoughts of what I wanted to be without having something realistic that I wanted to be. And so my sister came to me and she said, okay, Robert, I'm in business. Why don't you get an MBA? That's the hot ticket these days, getting a Master of Business Administration. So I got into Vanderbilt. At the last minute, they let me in, and I got into their MBA program. Well, I wasn't happy there. I didn't know anything about business courses, and I was only doing it on my sister's advice. I really wasn't fit for it, and as I said, I was very unhappy. So there was that underlying stress for several years of just trying to keep up with the curriculum. I didn't know anything about finance. I didn't know anything about marketing. I didn't know anything about accounting. I was absolutely ignorant about those things. And so, but this was an advanced course in those subjects. So I was kind of like I was a fish out of water. I mean, I just did not enjoy it at all. But then in my second year, then the real psychiatric problems started to show up. And in my second year of graduate school, I started to have delusions of grandeur, thinking that I was a great person, thinking that I was a diplomat was one that I would constantly have, thinking that I was a great marketing genius and all that, had great insight and all sorts of things. So one night, I'm sitting on the bed in my bedroom. There's a light bulb in a closet in the room, and the closet was louvered, and the light from the louvered would go through the louvered closet and lay upon me. And all of a sudden I knew, and this is one of the things that you have with mental illnesses, with delusions, is you have great realizations about things, great insight about things. And I knew that this light bulb was the light of God, and that it was sending me messages, telepathic messages. It was beaming into my head. These are the things that when you're mentally ill, you think these things are real, and it's very scary. But the light was beaming messages into my head, and the message was that there was a nuclear holocaust or a nuclear attack that was targeting Nashville. And I looked outside the window and there was a lightning storm, and I took the lightning storm as explosions, and all of a sudden I had the great need to tell somebody about this. I needed to report this event I needed to report it to the authorities. I had the mission. It was my duty to report this terrible happening. And so I got my jacket, I ran down the stairs, jumped in my car, drove off into the night into Nashville. And I said, well, who should I tell? I don't know who to tell. Oh, I should tell Alexander Hurd, the chancellor of Vanderbilt. He would be the person, the authority person that I should tell of this. Driving through the streets of Nashville, don't know where he lives, have no idea where he lives. So I'm just driving around. Sometimes God talks about spirituality. Sometimes God intervenes. And this is how he intervened. I came up to a four-way stop, and there was a car that went in the other direction. And I knew that I should follow that car. That car would take me to where I'm supposed to go. Just this realization. So I followed the car through the back streets of Nashville's West End, came up to a large building with a portico, and I said, this is where I'm supposed to be. This is where I'm supposed to be. I get out of the car, walk in the door. There's a woman at a desk, and I said, I need to see Alexander Hurd, the chancellor. I have terrible news to tell him. And the woman said, follow me. So she took me to a room, small room, very lighted, bright fluorescent lights. And then on the wall, I noticed there was a blood pressure cuff. And all of a sudden, I realized that I was in the emergency room at Vanderbilt Medical Center. I had followed that car randomly. This to me was a real intervention. You know, God had actually brought me to this emergency room at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. And so the nurse or the doctor came in and tried to talk to me. I wouldn't say anything. I was mute. I wouldn't say anything. Then finally she leaves and I say something. And she turns around and she interviews me and she finds out that I'm very psychotic. And so they said, well, we're going to put you in the psychiatric unit, which they did. And 10 days later, I was out of the psychiatric unit, and I was on an antipsychotic medication. Tried to get me back into classes, couldn't do it. So I had to quit graduate school. I was devastated. Never had such a failure in life. I had never in life had failures, and so I was not accustomed to being able to cope with having a failure. I became very depressed, and I had about a 6 or 8 month depression, very low, would ruminate on problems. They would just go again and again in my mind, had no energy, no desire to do anything. After about 6 months, I started to come out of it, and I got a job at St. Andrews, the local high school, teaching history. So I was a substitute. And then I got a job at a restaurant. So I started to work and come back a little bit. And I had this one blemish on my record that I had quit graduate school, but that was okay. So then I got interviewed by the director of admissions at Sewanee for a job as the assistant director of admissions, and I got the job. Our assistant director, this is director of admissions, have been grooming me for a long time for this particular job. I was doing it okay, but then the delusion started to come back. You know, I had had the depression and seemed to recover. Everybody said, well, Robert's back on the track again. He's going to be okay. This was just a minor incident that he had. He's going to be okay. But no, delusion started to come back. Walking down the quadrangle at Sewanee and thinking that I was an angel and I had the mission of trying to save the University of the South from whatever, that this was my thing that I should do supernaturally. Went on a recruiting tour to South Carolina. This is what I was supposed to do as the assistant director of admissions, was to go around to high schools, different regions of the country, and promote the University of the South. Well, I got on this first recruiting trip. Then I got psychotic again. and I got psychotic and I got paralyzed with fear and anxiety, psychosis. Was on the trip for about 2 days and I said, I can't do this. I can't do this. I've got to go home. So I took a plane, I flew back, landed in Chattanooga and got off the plane, and my mother and a good friend of hers were there, and they were there to meet me. And they were very dour, very sad. Went back to Swanee and the director of admissions fired me. No, he didn't even talk to me. He just said, get out of the office before sundown. Just you're fired. That was a very, very difficult, yeah.
May I ask you one question? What years were these? What year was it?
Oh, this is when I was 23, and this was 1979, 1980 about. Okay. Yeah, there's a lot of stigma about mental illness back then, more than there tends to be today. And so I got fired, and I got into another deep depression, and it was very severe. Couldn't do anything. So finally, after about 6 or 8 months, my parents say, Robert, we're going to send you to Tucson, Arizona, where my cousin's husband is a psychiatrist. Couldn't find good psychiatric help in Tennessee. Nobody seemed to be able to help me. So we go to Tucson, Arizona, and there we'll get you hooked up with Charlie Newman, who is husband of my father's cousin. And so I went out there, started living with a kind of a nice lady. I rented a room in her house and got into a good psychiatrist. And they said, Robert, you're bipolar. Well, this was a change, and I think I welcomed it. I was in a psychiatric unit there, and they started me on a drug called lithium. And so I started on lithium. Well, to kind of move ahead here a little bit, I took lithium for many years. And after Tucson, then I had a chance to work in a summer camp called Camp Marywood. Had a wonderful time there. I was recovered fairly well. Had a wonderful time at Camp Marywood, and came back, and I just got involved with the computer courses at Swanee. They let me take courses there as a special student, so it didn't cost anything. And I just went into the computer data processing and just loved it and did very well there and so forth. Then I got a job. I finally got another job working in the data processing center. And it was a low-level job, but I was happy to have it. And so for a year, I would go in on Sundays and back up the computer, and during the week, I would run the line printer and so forth. Did this until I started to get the psychosis again. And I remember one time there were a number of boxes that had been sent to them for new equipment, Hewlett Packard equipment, new terminals, and the boxes were there, and then I had an overwhelming feeling that I should open the boxes. The boxes needed to be opened, they were there, and also there was a locked door to the actual computer, which had one of those push button codes on it. And I said, well, the custodian needs to go in there and clean up the computer room. So I gave him the code to the door, which would let him into there. This was verboten. I mean, this was something that The thing that was thing that got me about it, is that, my reputation as having a mental illness followed me. I mean, this was a very small community. Swanee is a very small community. And I was expelled from the admissions department, and so it became discovered throughout the university and throughout the community that Robert has a mental illness. This is Robert Lundin. He had done so well in high school and he has such great promise and all that, and then doggone it, he gets mentally ill. So my reputation had followed me into this job with the admission, with the computer, with the data processing. And my immediate supervisor, I could tell didn't trust me. She thought I was going to hack the computer or do something wrong or do something bad. And so I opened these boxes and I gave the computer code away to the custodian, and they fired me. And so I remember being called in and they fired me. And I had been having psychosis. And so I did have a problem, but I thought that I was really, I was well enough to work on the computer and do the computer, but no, they fired me. This was another blow. And this was my second time I had been fired from the University of the South. And so my third time working for the University of the South is I got a job on the grounds crew, mowing lawns and raking leaves and cleaning up trash and all that. So I had gone from assistant director of admissions to a computer operator to a grounds crew member. So it was kind of a demotion over the years. So anyway, these were not good times. And I was still being medicated with a drug called lithium. But then I had an edge to my personality, and I was still having psychological problems. So I got to a psychiatrist and he said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try a new drug on you called Tegretol. And he said, it's a drug that's made for epilepsy, but it has an off-label use for manic depression, for bipolar. So I said, yeah, I'll take anything. I can't live the way I've been living. So he prescribed Tegretol, and my life changed. All of a sudden, my life changed. And I didn't have this terrible negative attitude. I started to think about good things. I remembered being back at college and having and working in the drama department, having fun and friends and things like that. I really didn't have any friends during these years. So Tegretol helped a lot. But I still wasn't employable by Swanee. And so there was really no job for me there. But I have to say I was a little industrious. I wouldn't just sit around and do nothing. My parents were very kind to me and they let me live at home. Of course, I did my part. I painted rooms and cleaned up the lawn and put in a burglar alarm. I was able to install that. But I was industrious and I had no job there. Well, now when I was at St. Andrews, when I was at Camp Marywood, I was there for 3 summers. And during my time at Camp Marywood, I got kind of a crush on the woman that was in charge of the equestrian program, the horseback riding program. And she would take me out on horseback rides early in the morning and got to know each other. I got a big crush on her. Well, after my third job at Swanee, I was still interested in horses and I became infatuated with horses. I was just head over heels with horses. And the woman that ran the equestrian program at Swanee at the university, she was very nice. And she said, well, I have an uncle who has bipolar disorder also. So I would like you can come and ride in my program. And I welcome you to be a part of my program. So I got into horses and started riding, bought myself my own horse. And I said, I'm going to start, I have some carpentry skills that I had learned in college in the drama department, building sets and props in the drama department. So I used some of my carpentry skills to build horse jumps. And I started selling horse jumps, going to equestrian horse jumping events and selling horse jumps. Then also that led to a little bit of a business, good business, which I call Bob's Equestrian, which I was sending knickknacks and photographs and apparel and things like that, and horse shows. And I went around the country, and all of a sudden this developed into a real business. I went down around the country, went down to Tampa, to West Palm Beach, to Aiken, Georgia, followed the circuit, selling things with Bob's Equestrian. This led to getting involved with the United States Equestrian Team. I thought they were just the best thing ever. And so I got involved with them. I started selling US Equestrian Team merchandise, and I sold it all over the country. Sold it from the East Coast circuits and the West Coast circuits and so forth. But that eventually, that business failed. I was a terrible businessman. I did keep books. I was just terrible. So that business failed. And then I came up to this area. I went to a steeplechase event in Warrenville to work that event. And I found Glen Ellen. I said, well, this would be a nice place to work. I'm going to live here. So God again intervenes. And I'm at the Busy Bee Barbershop, which I think it's still open. Is it still open, the Busy Bee?
Still there, yeah.
Is it still
I don't
open?
know if it's open, but it's still there.
Yeah, it's still there. Getting my hair cut at the Busy Bee Barbershop, and I say to the barber, I said, well, do you know any place around here that has an open apartment? I'd like to live in an apartment. And he said, next door. Next door, there's an apartment building and they have an apartment. And so I went over there, rented an apartment, and then I've been in Glen Ellen since 1990, I think. 34 years. Had terrible troubles right after I moved here. Terrible troubles. Bad psychoses, bad psychiatric breaks, 3 of them in a year. And this is the final story I'll tell. I was very badly psychotic once, and I was thinking that I was an emissary. I was supposed to go to the Middle East and rescue hostages there. This was just a terrible, and I was in Chicago and getting ESP messages from the buildings that were being beamed into my head. And all of a sudden I had and this is where God intervened again. I had just a moment of reality. God said, bing, you're going to understand where you are and what you're doing. And I did. And I said, my gosh, you're really, really sick, Robert. You got to get some help. So then I said, well, I'm gonna drive down to Tennessee and stay with my parents and they will take care of me down there because I could realize that I was really sick. And so I get in the car, driving down, going through Indiana, having the worst psychosis I'd ever had. Flying saucers flying into the room, into the car, a giant bug-like or insect-like monster behind the moon, sucking my soul out through my eyes, morphine, all sorts of delusions and hallucinations. Got to Evansville, Indiana. And this is where God intervened in my life in a real way. I got to Indiana, got stopped by a policeman after I was driving kind of erratically, and he came up to the car, opened the window, and he looked at me and asked me a few questions, and then he said, "Do you want to go to the hospital?" And I said, "I really need to go to the hospital." And so he took me there, and he handcuffed me, put me in the front seat of his car, drove me to the hospital. And at that hospital, that particular hospital, there was a psychiatrist that had insight, and he could see that I had the mood swings, which I was taking lithium and Tegretol for. But he said, you also have psychosis. And what we need to do is put you on an antipsychotic medication. So you're taking both the mood stabilizers and the antipsychotic medication. Just happened to meet this psychiatrist, got stopped by a policeman. It takes me to the hospital, meets the psychiatrist, and it changed my life. And all of a sudden, I was not battling the delusions anymore. They stopped. And so they just stopped. And so I used to have problems that they would get into my thinking. I couldn't stop them. I tried all my will to stop these delusions. They stopped. And not only did they stop, but I started to have realistic goals. I no longer wanted to save the USCT, save the equestrian community, save hostages and all that. I no longer wanted to do these fantastic things. I started to have I started to have reasonable goals. And I remembered that I had done photography quite a bit in high school. I was pretty good at it. So I brought my photography equipment to Glen Ellen, set up a darkroom in my apartment, started taking photographs around Glen Ellen. I took a photograph of two men, workmen, who were in a pit fixing a water line. And I took a picture. They were covered with mud, took a picture, and for some reason, intuition, moved God. I took that picture and went to the Glen Ellen News, put it in their mail slot, and the next day it was on the front page of their newspaper. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is really good. So I took another picture and put it into their mail slot on the front page of their newspaper. And then finally I had a little bit of courage. I went up to the managing editor and I said, I'm the one who's been taking those photographs and putting them in your mail slot. And she said, oh, we owe you $75. So that began my career in journalism. And
Bob, I'm just gonna say that I think Laura has to sign off.
oh, okay, what do I have to do?
Well, I think you don't have to do anything, but Laura, do you need to sign off?
I do. I'm so sorry, but thank you all for being here. I'm just going to stop recording and we're going to move to the other one, to the sanctuary. Have a great